From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 2 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
We've provided a platform for success for some of the most respected companies in the country. We fueled their growth with a highly educated workforce and a can-do, pro-business attitude. Just ask our trusted business partner, Toyota. Visit Mississippi.org to see what we can do for you.
If, for such a small word, it packs a wallop. If I live to 100, if Social Security isn't enough, if my heart gets broken, if she says yes. We believe if should never hold you back. If should be managed with a plan that builds on what you already have. Together, we can create a personal safety net, a launching pad for all those brilliant ifs in the middle of life. You can call on our expertise and get guarantees for the if in life. After all, we're MetLife.
Issue 1, Shelving the Shield.
The best way to responsibly advance our security and the security of our allies is to deploy a missile defense system that best responds to the threats that we face.
Commander-in-Chief Obama announced this week that he was overhauling plans for a missile defense shield in Eastern Europe. The ground-based interceptors were to have been put in Poland, with a related radar site in the Czech Republic. Moscow had previously denounced this Bush-era missile defense layout. President Obama promised to put in its place a stronger and swifter defense system to protect U.S. allies from any threat from Iran. U.S. officials say that the move is non-ideological. They deny that dropping the Bush scheme is a quid pro quo in return for Russia's support for tougher United Nations sanctions on Iran. As for the new U.S. plan for missile defense in Europe, it includes seaborne interceptors, airborne sensors, and a greater emphasis on the threat of Iranian short-range missiles.
This new approach will provide capabilities sooner, build on proven systems, and offer greater defenses against the threat of missile attack than the 2007 European Missile Defense Program.
Secretary of Defense Robert Gates reinforced the Commander-in-Chief.
Those who say we are scrapping missile defense in Europe are either misinformed or misrepresenting the reality of what we are doing.
Gates says that the new approach will be more effective than the previous Bush defense system, which Gates says he himself had approved. Privately, diplomats are saying that if the U.S. had pushed ahead with the Bush system, it would have jeopardized President Obama's attempt to reset relations with Moscow. Question: what was the real reason why the Bush missile shield was abandoned by Obama? Was it technology or was it statecraft?
Statecraft, John. This has really sent the Russians up the wall when Bush made the decision to put the missiles in and put the radars in the Czech Republic. But I think it's a very wise decision on the president's part. The Iranians don't have an ICBM. They don't have an atomic bomb. They haven't weaponized an atomic bomb. They are no threat to Poland or Eastern Europe or the United States. If they are a threat, they are a threat to Israel and their Arab Sunni neighbors. Therefore, the decision makes sense in that Gates is providing a defense against their Shahab-2 missile, 1,200-mile missile, which can hit Israel, can hit other places in the Middle East. I think it's a wise decision, a gutsy decision. He's going to get hammered by conservatives who are very much behind this Bush thing. But all the Bush thing did was really, raise the alarms, not only the Russian government, the Russian people are outraged. Americans are putting missiles in Europe. Now, there's paranoia there, but I think Obama did a wise and correct thing to address it, to take this down, and to set this new other system up.
So he's doing it to accommodate intermediate range missiles, which is what Iran has. They don't have the long range.
You can deal with Scuds and these 800-mile missiles and 1,200-mile missiles. They don't have an ICBM, a long-range missile.
What do you think of that naive view, Eleanor?
Here's where the left meets with the rational right. This is a smart decision. It's one that he telegraphed during the campaign. He is replacing a fantasy system, a system which has not demonstrated that it can work, which is catching these long-range missiles, and a very expensive fantasy adventure, with a proven technology that can be done from ships and that can counter the threat that currently exists. And I think when you've got the Secretary of Defense, who is a holdover from the Bush administration, you've got the Joint Chiefs backing this, you've got people like Senator Webb, Virginia Senator Webb, who's former Republican Navy Secretary, you're still going to get the pushback from the right, from the neocons, because ideologically they had a lot invested in this. Goes back to Star Wars. It's been heavily romanced, but the facts support the president's position.
Well, Gates is also a good soldier.
Gates is a very smart individual who gets extraordinarily high marks from Republicans and Democrats.
Give us the real answer, will you?
The real answer is that during the presidential transition, Vice President Biden said that the new, young, untested Democratic president was going to be tested by our adversaries. Vladimir Putin didn't wait very long to test this young Democratic president, and Obama buckled. Just as the Soviets tested John Kennedy and we got Soviet missiles in Cuba, just as they tested Jimmy Carter and we had Soviet troops marching through Afghanistan. This will embolden the Russians. Look, Obama did this negotiation. The Russians look at this as a zero-sum game. They don't look at it like the West or as Obama looks at it, which is a win-win kind of diplomacy. The Russians look at it as a zero-sum game. The United States capitulated on this without getting anything in return of note. No Russian help in squeezing Iran on their nuclear program, no sovereignty guarantee for the state of Georgia, and no restrictions on arms sales or nuclear transfers to Venezuela. So without getting anything concrete in return, this was a giveaway to the Russians, throwing our steadfast, loyal allies like Poland and the Czech Republic that have given a lot of troops and a lot of commitment to NATO and to Iraq and Afghanistan in particular, and are really upset about this. He threw all of this away for nothing.
You don't
and
think
allowed the Russians to know that now they can roll this guy on just about anything.
You don't
so
think
watch for them to get a lot more aggressive.
You don't think it's dispositive? Namely, it puts Russians in a good frame of mind to cut a deal, and there probably was pre-wiring going on, wasn't there?
I'll tell you that despite the ostensible reason for this missile defense system in Eastern Europe to protect against Iranian missiles, there were actually two bigger reasons for the system to go into place. One was an extra layer of defense for the eastern seaboard, because we have this kind of missile defense system in California and Alaska, but it really left the eastern seaboard, New York, Boston, Washington, very vulnerable to a missile attack.
Do you think Iran's going to reach our East Coast?
Let me turn to General Page here.
Well, here's where we see the right and left part again. Right? But as Pat predicted, there is a neocon reaction here.
Right.
But I think that I trust Secretary Gates to understand the strategic value of these new missiles. Now, he is an independent enough voice that he's respected by both sides for good reason. Nice thing about missiles, Monica, is you can move them back. You know, if we don't get what we want from Russia later on, we've still got that kind of portability and leverage. But at present, now, it doesn't really make sense to have this kind of a provocative setup unless we really need it, especially when we do need Russia on our side as far as dealing with Iran.
You see that the new missiles are going to be placed in about half a dozen different sites around Europe.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, you got the smaller missiles, yeah.
Look, the truth is, Iran is not a threat to anybody right now. If it is a threat, it would be a threat to Israel. It doesn't have an atomic bomb. It doesn't have an ICBM. Tell me why these idiots would fire a missile at an American base and get themselves blown to kingdom come. This Iranian thing is pumped up and pumped up and pumped up. Well, they do have a problem with the nuclear program.
I have a question for Monica, and the question is Israel on board on this?
I have not heard a reaction,
they got more short range.
Let her
They get
finish.
more
Look,
protection
I wanna-
this way. They get protection this way. The threat they face is from the short and medium range missiles.
How about
I imagine
yes,
they are
but they
on
were going to
board.
face this Iranian threat as they do in any event. Look, this idea that somehow this missile shield was provocative to Russia. You were going to put 10 interceptors in Poland and the Czech Republic, and that was going to counteract 4,100 Russian missiles and
the
warheads.
placement that counts.
Give me a break.
The placement
Listen,
that counts, not the number.
there was a
You're defending
bigger
Poland from Iran?
And
What are we
all
talking
of
about?
this romanticizing that Russia really isn't a threat. I mean, you guys are out to lunch
Nobody's
on that.
Nobody is romanticizing
Well, if
Russia,
you don't
and I
think
do
that the Russians
sympathize.
pose a
I
serious
do
threat.
sympathize with Eastern European countries who have plenty reason to worry about the Russians, and you've got to do some hand-holding and getting them to understand this deal as well. But the truth is that the U.S. missiles were very controversial among the publics in both Poland and Czechoslovakia, and they're not going to rise up.
There
and
must
demand
be
this.
there must be some reason out there. There must be some observable reality that indicates to the president that the Russian-U.S. relationship, which was pretty bad before he took office, that it can be reset. Now, what's the indication that
John,
Russia is available to be wooed?
You got a problem here, and Monica does have this point. We are very close to a Black Sea war between Russia and Georgia for this reason. The Georgians have blockaded Abkhazia, which broke away and is independent and recognized by Russia after the August
And very
War.
happy.
And very happy, but the Georgians have blockaded them. They're stopping ships, and the Russians this past week negotiated a treaty with Abkhazia, and if the Georgians try to maintain that blockade, the Russian Coast Guard will take them on, and the Americans
How do we fit into that puzzle?
we better tell Saakashvili, don't start blockading Abkhazia. We know you don't like it, but don't do it.
The president's
Well,
gotta
you know, he marches to his own drummer.
All right, then tell him deal with the Russians to his own drummer.
But hasn't he been learned the Russian lessons by South Ossetia?
He wants to be very tough, and he wants to drag us into his arguments.
But the president's got to be tough also that no meddling in Ukraine, which is kind of the next
that's
on
the
the
next
Russian
one.
checklist.
Right.
So he doesn't want to give them reasons to think he's weak. And you're going to hear all the criticism. I mean, John McCain was out of the box very quickly, basically saying this weakens our posture. And the Republicans have a vested interest in portraying President Obama as weak, which is a line of a narrative line that does not serve the country well.
We're talking about the Trans-Caucasus. We're talking about Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. And I was in Georgia about a year and a half ago, and you commonly hear that John McCain spends a lot of time in Georgia, so he knows the scene over there.
He has for
His
years.
guy-
But
his-
you saw during the campaign, though his reaction was too quick.
Exit question. On balance, was Commander-in-Chief Obama's missile defense decision smart?
It was a wise decision, but Monica does have this point. The Russians have other fish to fry in Ukraine and Georgia, and I don't think he's bought himself anything great by doing this. He did the right thing, but I think the Russians are going to be a problem.
Did he lose?
No,
In
he
any
had-
sense? Did
I
he
think
lost
did.
anything?
He did the right thing with the Russian people, and frankly, Eleanor's right. Look, the Czechs and the Poles initially didn't want this thing in there.
Right.
Don't you
He's
think that there must be some deal out there that we don't know about?
Well, there was an exchange of letters, I believe, before Obama took office, basically suggesting that if this administration didn't go ahead with those missiles, that perhaps Russia could be more helpful restraining Iran, and that from developing a nuclear weapon. That is the larger issue here. I don't think it's a quid pro quo. I wish it were. I don't think you can trust the Russians to that extent. But I think we have removed something that was unnecessarily provocative, and you can't automatically now say, the Russians are not going to work with us. A lot of these things are in their best interests as well.
What's happening next week?
You know what's happening? President Obama is meeting with the Russian President Medvedev.
Where?
In New York at the meeting of
And
the
then
UN
they go to
Security
where?
Council.
Isn't he in on the G20?
And then it's the G20 meeting.
So
Yes.
they're going to go
So
from New York on Tuesday. Wednesday they're going to go to Pittsburgh. They're going to be there for what, Thursday and Friday.
Right, through the end of
In
the
Pittsburgh.
week. And this was
And
meant
it's gonna be buddy-buddy,
grease the skids for that meeting. But look, my
But you don't
problem
think it's
is
going to
that
work?
Well, I mean, I think that the Russians
You
respond
think it's a trap
to
laid
strength.
by the Russians?
I think that the Russians respond to strength. Look, just the mere holding out of a fantasy idea, as Eleanor put it, of Star Wars was one of the primary reasons of bankrupting the Soviet Union and allowing the West to win the Cold War. I also think that this Bush idea of the missile defense shield in Eastern Europe was part of a global defense architecture so that our allies would feel protected and by the United States and would feel that they wouldn't have to go create their
Now
own
we've sold
arsenals
out.
and their own deterrence. And now you're going to start seeing all of this develop in Europe and Eastern Europe and in the Middle East, and arms races are going to begin. This is a disaster.
For all you deficit-concerned people, though, you couldn't continue to pour all that money into the system that doesn't work and not address the threat that really exists. So the money had to go somewhere. Better it goes to address the problem that Europe is facing right now.
General
and Israel.
Page, you know that against this background, we had a rather ironic address in Warsaw by Putin,
Right.
within the past couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't perfect, but it moved in the direction of integration to the world community, and he apologized to Poland, did he not?
70th anniversary of the German invasion of Poland, September 1, where the Russians came
Yes.
in. One bad thing
And
is
he apologized for the relationship between
the
the
missile deal.
then Soviets and the Germans.
We announced the missile deal on the 70th anniversary of the Russian invasion of Poland, John,
Right,
which
right.
was probably
Bad timing.
Not good, but indicative.
Do you want to answer the question?
Which is
one?
Putin sending a signal? Oh, is Obama's move smart?
Smart.
Okay, I will say.
If you were
I will say
advising
yes.
Obama, would you say yes? Do it now.
I would say
Prepare
yes.
for Pittsburgh.
I would say yes in the short term here, definitely. Prepare for the talks. Also show that we're acting in good faith. Now see how Putin is going to respond.
The whole thing has been wired. Issue 2, Carter race baiting.
Congressman Joe Wilson's outburst at President Obama in the House of Representatives put a national focus on civility in politics. That debate on civility in politics then morphed into racism in politics. Former Democratic President Jimmy Carter did the morphing.
I think an overwhelming portion of the intensely demonstrated animosity toward President Barack Obama is based on the fact that he is a black man, that he's African American. And I think it's bubbled up to the surface because of a belief among many white people, not just in the South but around the country, that African Americans are not qualified to lead this great country.
On the next day, President Carter stated his broad conclusion on racism in America with brutal clarity.
There is an inherent feeling among many people in this country that an African American ought not to be president.
Republicans responded to Carter with outrage. Republican Party Chairman Michael Steele had this to say to the former president.
Make it as short and sweet and simple as possible. You're just dead wrong. And the reality of it is, this is about policy. Differences in how we approach solving some of these issues that we're confronting on health care and the economy. And the fact that there are citizens around the country, I don't care what color they are, that are outraged or confused or concerned or whatever, however they come to this debate, that has nothing to do with the color of the president's skin. I am, like a lot of Americans, concerned and disagree with the president's policies and approaches, from the stimulus spending to this health care strategy.
Question, who won this argument, Carter or Steele? Clarence Page.
Well, I think it's an unfortunate circular argument because I don't think either one of them really hit the point. Jimmy Carter speaking from his generation, which I appreciate. I'm old enough to remember Jim Crow, and we have made progress. But when he said that he thought racism was the overwhelming feeling behind the opposition to Obama, I think that was going too far. I mean, you're going to find traces of it on the right, just as you're going to find, anti-globalist radicals on the left. But I think, no, there's so many other reasons for opposition to Obama, legitimate or otherwise, whether you agree with them or not, that racism is just a part of that. Larger, I think, is the old populist clash in this country against the elites, and in a way, it's kind of oddly a sign of progress that we have a black man who's powerful enough to be rallied against by anti-elitists.
Monica.
Well, I think during the Bush years, we heard from the left that dissent was the highest form of patriotism. And now in the age of Obama, they want to say that dissent is the lowest form of racism. I think it's despicable. I think it's toxic to our national conversation that anybody who has a legitimate opposition to what President Obama is doing, as Clarence points out, is painted as a racist. That's really the lowest of the low.
Cornell Belcher, who happens to be African American and who's polled for candidate Obama and President Obama. And what he basically says is that people with the most retrograde attitudes on race tend to gravitate to the far right of the Republican Party. And so Jimmy Carter is mistaken when he says many people, but some people, and a lot of these really negative racial sentiments have been expressed, and we've seen them on television. And I have not heard from moderate Republicans repudiating them. And wait a second. President Reagan used to tell a joke about a guy who went to see a psychiatrist because his brother thought he was a chicken. And the psychiatrist said, "How long has this been going on?" He said, 10 years. And he said, "Well, why haven't you sought help earlier?" And he said, "Because we need the eggs." The Republicans need those votes. And that's what it's about.
Quickly, Pat.
The Panthers in that crowd are not on the right. Let me say this. It was a statement of malevolence, stupidity, and moral arrogance. How does he know what's in Joe Wilson's heart? Carter, how does he know what's in Joe Wilson's heart?
Maybe his support for strong
how does
government
he
might
know?
be a clue.
How does he know what's in the hearts of those people? You talked. How does he know what's in the hearts of those people up there protesting who supported Obama? He was at 75%. He falls to 50. Did they suddenly discover that he was black? That's preposterous.
Also, there were circumstances there that are mitigating. Especially in the context of where the heat is and the crowd gatherings. He had just finished 3 appearances, I believe, in succession before audiences, big amphitheater kind of audiences.
Obama handled it beautifully. He got, this guy was a gauche, and Obama says, "I accept the apology. This isn't about race." Carter's got to drag this thing in and put it out there. It's all about Jimmy.
Issue 3, the rush for health reform. President Obama is campaigning for health care, and he's in a hurry.
We are going to get it done this year. We are going to get it done this year.
The president wants to sign a health care bill now.
The good news.
Why the rush? The president cites the cost of health insurance, both for those who have it and for those who don't. Health costs are rising dramatically each year, and the number of Americans without insurance is going up, too. And there's also the political component. True, Democrats have big majorities in both the House and the Senate, but the personal political capital Mr. Obama won in the election last year is ebbing by the day. In 2010, right around the corner, is another election year for Congress. All 435 members of the House must face the voters. And at least 36 Senate seats, more than 1/3 of the 100 members of the Senate, are up for grabs. Also, off-year campaign seasons frequently mean the death knell for the big-ticket items. And one of those big tickets is the president's $1 trillion health care overhaul. And so, Mr. Obama says the time is now. Republicans opposed to the plan say, "Slow down, Mr. President. You're driving us nuts."
We need to debate this for the next several months. To put an artificial deadline on passing a bill of this magnitude is crazy.
Question, why are the Democrats moving this so fast? Eleanor.
If you call 100 years moving it fast, I disagree. As the president pointed out, every president since Teddy Roosevelt has tried to get this legislation. And Congressman John Dingell is a living testament to how long this fight is going on. His father held his seat before him, worked with FDR and Truman, and introduced health care legislation then that his son introduces every year, and John Dingell has held his seat since 1955.
48 years.
Yes, and he's now 83 and gets around in crutches. And so I think we've taken enough time to study the issue. And in Washington, calling for delay is a recipe. It's a standard operation procedure to kill
The
legislation.
problem is that whatever is enacted by Congress is de facto irrevocable. You cannot take this kind of a supply chain away from the American people. You couldn't do it with Medicare. You couldn't do it with Medicaid. You couldn't do it with Social Security. Am I right or wrong? Therefore, we ought to get it absolutely right, and they should take their time.
You are right, because once an entitlement is given away, it is impossible to take it back. We're talking about nearly 20% of the U.S. economy. The reason they're doing it so fast is because they realize their window of opportunity is shutting pretty fast here. When you look at these polls, 53% of the American people are now against Obamacare. The more time that transpires, the more the public is aligned against it.
They're against it, don't know what it is.
Well, they're learning through the
computer. The opposition is on the Democratic side.
All that we have seen is stuff get taken away from it. You talk about receding. I mean, we should be debating single payer. That's the real debate, but we can't even get that far. They put out a public option as a compromise, and now that's disappearing. You know, I mean, this is all moving in such a direction that's been whittled down. There's plenty to add on in later years.
What's wrong with incrementalism and taking a piece?
Well, Eleanor's
at a
right,
time?
John. This debate has been going on for 100 years, especially since Harry Truman and Lyndon Johnson in particular. We should be debating expanding Medicare to cover everybody. That should be the real argument.
The real hurdle is the public option. And it's pretty clear that the Congress is not going to go with public option.
The Senate doesn't have enough votes yet.
But what's wrong with an incremental approach after that would stretch into next year and help the Democrats because it would then be seen as enlightened legislation and guarantee a lot of Senate seats and retention of the House.
What's
also.
incremental to some is foot dragging to others. If you don't do enough that it really makes a difference. Your own base.
Well, but they all have their own individual independence, like portability.
John, let me get into this. The real thing that's behind this is Rahm's rule, which says you never let a great crisis go to waste. Obama came in, a transformational president. I'm going to get this thing done. I'm going to get it all the way through. If they don't get it done big this year, it'll be another number of years. And John, what he's got is he's got 60 votes now in the Senate when they get the Democrat. He's got a 70-vote margin. And the Democrats all believe they've got to get this done. There's a real incentive of the entire party. Obama, the Blue Dogs, and the Progressives. Right. I think he's going to get something through that.
Absolutely.
Do you, first of all, believe in the political logic that's being advanced by Obama and by Rahm's brother?
I think this country is looking at $9 trillion in deficits, can't afford it. I think we're headed right down the
can't you see the advantage of incrementalism and taking piece by piece and stretching it?
I certainly can, but they got the votes.
Pat, a false prediction. If you had to quantify the reduction in black-white racism in the United States over the last 20 years, what would you say it is?
I think the idea of white racism is going down very, very dramatically. There is black racism in the black community, and there's a real hostility, and it's manifest in crime.
Greatly reduced.
Greatly reduced in both communities, but it's there.
So you're saying blacks are racist and whites aren't? I can't buy into that.
Well, the racist issue, quickly.
We've made enormous strides among people. Politicians still exploit it.
Yes, and as a matter of legal discrimination, it doesn't exist. Does it exist in terms of judgments? Yes, to some extent.
As racism has receded, suspicion of racism has filled the gap. So it's about the same.
You think it's about the same?
With perspectives.
I think the reduction has been great. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter.